Okay, hello everyone. So here I am just doing a recap of our lesson about um, converting to black and white, as well as using adjustment brushes in Camera Raw. So if we were to batch edit a bunch of images from the same series, we would see all of those thumbnails opened up on our film strip to the left, which we have discussed in a previous lesson on batch editing. So if we had multiple images at the same time that we wanted to apply the same edits to, we would go ahead and highlight those images in that film strip. So in this case, just to show you the steps, I have only opened one image. It is a DNG, it is a RAW, so we do have this raw data to work with. So for now, we're on the first tool in our toolbar to the right in Camera Raw. That, of course, is our edit sliders, where we will do our global edits, but it's also where we can go ahead and convert to black and white. And that's as simple as going up to edit and seeing where it says B and W for black and white and clicking this button on. So now we have our image. I'm going to quickly go through our global edits because this is not something that's new to you guys anymore. And we'll just go from there and then jump into adjustment brushes. So here we go. Just going to run through these really quick here. Got our black slider, texture. Texture is really good for landscape. Clarity, I don't want to bring too much in there. Now, dehaze, this could be an instance where, we could use that to our advantage, but I don't think there's a whole lot of dehaze that's necessary here. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to collapse these as I fly through them. Go, detail. I know I want to bring out quite a bit of detail, so I'm going to push that pretty high. Using my Alt key, I can see where I'm applying this here. Perfect. I'm just going to expand this. And now, so we've done our basic curve and details panels here. And normally where we would see color mixer is now black and white mixer, or B&W mixer. And all that does here is gives us all of the colors that may be present in your image broken down here. And you'll see one side of the slider, the left side here is dark, one side is bright, the right side, and that is to do with your luminescence. So virtually, if you grab that slider, push it to the right, then it's going to have a brighter luminescence or a darker luminescence to the left. And it all depends on what colors are present in your image. Now I know this is a landscape, so there's going to be a lot of greens, a lot of blues probably in the water as well as the sky. So for the sake of argument, let's say, okay, we've got our greens. And we can see how by pushing the luminescence up to the right, it kind of starts to shape our landscape even more. So we've got our contrast that is heightening, showing more drama and interest, and just going through these sliders. Sometimes they're not necessarily obvious if those colors are present. Sometimes they're very obvious. Like I would never right away guess that there's oranges. Yellows make sense because of the sky. And let's see, on and off. There we go. So it definitely did bump up the contrast a little bit more. Now that looks great, but I think that I want to go back and just further refine so that there's a bit more contrast involved. Boost up the contrast a little more. And that's just something that you're going to have to realize as you go with manipulating black and whites is just the contrast. You want to make sure that it still has a good punch to it, because virtually we're just looking at different shades from black to white, and we want this to look as interesting as possible. And another way to achieve that, once we have gone through and done all of our um, edits here, perfect, is if we go up to this brush tool. So it's called our adjustment brush, or we can do K on our keyboard. And essentially what this allows us to do is paint in areas, but we can also decide what these edits will contain. So in this case, let's say for the sake of argument, we want to brighten up this side of our cliff. I can use my bracket keys to make the brush bigger or smaller. The feather is how feathered out, so how harsh it goes from the center line of that brush all the way to where that dotted line is. Of course, the harsher the brush, just like our brush tool in Photoshop, the more intense the line can be, as opposed to having a bit of a fade at the end, which will allow us to blend things in a little bit better. So it's always great to have a feather. How much of a feather is completely up to you. Generally, I think 50 is a pretty good place to have that there. Density as well, that is exactly our opacity, so just another way of putting that. We see here that we have mask options, so if we toggle that on, I always like to change the color to red because it's a whole lot more obvious to me when I'm working with the adjustment brush where the adjustments have been made. So with that said, let us go ahead and brighten this area. We're going to pump up the exposure, and you know what? For the sake of argument, let's put it at +2 exposure. I can always adjust that. So I'm going to go in, see how it paints in my red mask here. It shows me that fade, the intensity of the inside of the brush as well, and the mask shows me exactly where all of this is getting painted in. So that's perfect. Once I have let go of my brush, it has dropped a little pin or a marker right where my brush started. So this is a good way to identify where we have placed certain edits. So I can always toggle that mask on and off, of course, and by doing so in this particular scenario, I can actually see what has been done by this brush. Now I know that this exposure level is far too high, so I can just bring that down here. And, just a little bit of a bump up, that's fine. But then I can also further adjust more sections of these sliders. And let's see how this manipulates. I obviously want to make this look as realistic as possible, but also I want to go ahead and make this improvement as well. So, okay, perfect. We've got all of these sliders, and all of these sliders aren't new to you. You know, your exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, texture, contrast, and dehaze. And you can actually include more sharpness, any noise reduction, etc. So this can all be very, very useful to you um, in many different ways. So, okay, now we have here our first adjustment brush pin. If we needed to erase a portion of it, we could always do that. We can create a new adjustment. So we're going to do that by clicking on this. Now we can see that the pin is no longer highlighted, but if I go ahead and um, put my cursor over that pin, it's showing me using the red from the mask that I chose where exactly that adjustment is situated. So now I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and I'm going to attack the sky next, maybe with a brush that is significantly smaller than that. And I want to reset all of these sliders because I don't want to apply the same edits that I just applied down here. And I'm going to pull this down just so I can see what I'm doing here and paint in on the sky. That's perfect. So this is a great way as well to concentrate certain edits in certain spots. So for example, when we did global edits, and we know that global edits affect the image as a whole, that's why they're called global, by doing those global edits, if I took down the highlights, which would recover information in the sky, that also means I'm taking highlights down from certain areas down here as well that maybe I don't want to have happen. So in this case, I know that I want specifically to recover more information that was in the sky. And I can do that specifically by going in after I've done my global edits, which we'll call our foundation in this particular case. And then I can go in with these adjustment brushes and attack specific properties or areas of the image that I want to manipulate in a certain way. And that way I can be very specific. So I've gone ahead and already adjusted the exposure, which allowed me to see exactly where I was painting as well. But that doesn't mean that that's permanent. That means that I can just, I've already selected that area by painting, and now I can further go in and adjust using all of these sliders, or one slider if I preferred, um, by going down and adjusting whatever it is that I want at the time. So again, if I go over and see that this is highlighted, that doesn't mean that I can't jump down here and um, see what I've done previously. And you can always go ahead and highlight and hit delete if that wasn't something that you wanted to do. So let's say here, delete. Oops, let's go right back. There we go. So there's that delete button, and that goes ahead and deletes that. I don't want that, so I'm going to Command Z and bring that back. And let's drop a third pin down in the foreground area just to lighten this up a touch so that we've got a little bit more depth in this image. So I'm going to go back up here and reset all of these sliders. I'm going to create new, and I'm going to go bump this exposure up a bit and just paint that in here and down here. And my objective is really just to open up some of this area, so I'm going to go to the shadows, bump that a little bit, the whites a little, and then just to fill in some of that so there's still that good contrast. And that looks good. Perfect. Okay. So let's just go on and off here. We can see the entire before and after of what we have done. So using the adjustment brushes here, or adjustment brush icon, we're able to lay down several adjustment brushes that basically just pinpoint certain areas that you want to make selective edits to. And those selective edits will allow you to either target one or multiple sliders that we've used already in our basic section for our global edits. So just further refining specific areas of our image. So at this point in time, I could go ahead and hit the save button, and that I could export as a JPEG in an area of my choosing. Don't forget that if you are trying to resize an image, that you ensure your size or your aspect ratio is correct already. Otherwise, if you want to just export as the natural resolution, so the resolution that your camera captured, you could do that as well. I would just suggest that you always make sure your resolution is at 300. That is super, super important because if it's for whatever reason, like mine was, set back to 72 ppi, this image will not have great resolution. So you can go ahead and hit save from there, and you've got yourself a JPEG of a black and white converted image that has used adjustment brushes to specifically tone and enhance certain areas of your image. And that is it, guys. Hope that was helpful, and we'll talk soon. All right, bye-bye.